this bike, this entire thing costs less than a high-end mobile phone. That's pretty crazy. If I were to ask you which was the first motorcycle that you ever rode, you'd probably remember that. But do you also remember what you felt when you first started riding motorcycles? As you keep riding bikes, and for those of us who can afford to move into these more lifestyle-oriented motorcycles, you start to forget that joy of pure motorcycling because you're focused on other things. You still enjoy it, but in a very different way. So over the last week, I've been doing something very different. I've been riding a motorcycle that I don't think I've ever shown anything of that type here on the channel, but it's very close to where I started. We didn't have a motorcycle at home, so I had to find a friend who was willing to lend me a motorcycle to learn on, which was hard to do until Vasant came around. If he's watching this video, thank you very much forever. But he had a TVS Victor and he let me learn to ride on that bike. He didn't really expect me to keep coming back for more, but I did, and he was nice enough to keep letting me do that. And I remember that at that point, nothing else mattered other than actually being able to ride a motorcycle, right? That purity of the feeling and the desire itself. It didn't matter what brand, it didn't matter what capacity, it didn't matter what it was made for. It didn't even matter whether it was well maintained or not. All I wanted was to be on a motorcycle and to ride it. There's always been a part of me that's wanted to sort of turn back the clock in some way and connect to that pure feeling again. And I figured that this might be an interesting way to do it. The motorcycle that I've been riding is the TVS Radeon in its newest, most updated and most refreshed avatar, and clearly so much has changed from the last time when I rode a bike like this. On the personal front, most of it has been downhill simply because aging is not kind to any of us, but as far as the motorcycle goes, the changes have been good. I've ridden over 300 kilometers on it, and you can instantly tell that so much has improved in terms of fit and finish and ride quality. The engine is really smooth, the clutch is extremely light, changing gears is effortless, the brakes are good, and the suspension and the seat. The seat is really long, really wide, surprisingly well cushioned. It just makes it possible to spend longer amounts of time on the saddle comfortably. But the highlight feature for me on this bike has to be this full digital cluster, which I think warrants a closer look. This one has a helmet warning indicator to remind you to wear your helmet as soon as it comes on, a digital tachometer, a digital speedometer, and a digital odometer. There's a nicely sized clock over here and a well-sized digital fuel gauge. This also has a light that comes on when you go into reserve. It starts blinking, then the light comes on. You have a indicator here of what mode you're in, eco or power, depending on the speed that you're going at, and a neutral indicator. It doesn't have a gear shift indicator, but it does tell you when you're in neutral. Your trip A and trip B are down here, but what's really cool is that this has a real-time mileage indicator, which lets you know what kind of mileage you're getting. I've been getting 60 kilometers per liter, which I can't begin to tell you how good that feels when fuel prices are where they currently are. I was getting about 65 until I started riding in power mode more, and then it dropped to 60, but that's still massive. The really cool thing about this is it keeps calculating even as you're riding and sort of lets you know how much mileage you're getting, so you can change the way you're riding or the speed that you're riding at to achieve better mileage. In addition to all that, you actually have a USB charging port right here on the dash, easily accessible to keep your devices charged. I really think that this particular part of this motorcycle, this console area, gives it a premium feel that you don't expect in a motorcycle in this price category and truly sets it apart.
I can't remember the last time I rode a bike where I had to go up for first gear. I'm so used to the 1 down 4 up or the 1 down 5 up that with this I keep falling into neutral simply because I go all the way down thinking I'm in first gear. this is not something that you always realize, but when we as motorcycle travelers or people who like adventurous motorcycling experiences, we go to places like Nepal or the Himalayas, or even closer to home in southern India in the Western Ghats or any of these places, you may not notice, but the people who live there usually use bikes like these as their daily drivers. So we land up there with our purpose-built motorcycles and all of this gear and a lot of cool stuff, which makes sense, right? Because for us it's an adventure travel experience. But motorcycles like this do the job day in and day out for people who live in that kind of terrain. And that's really interesting, right? Because this is like entry level-ish, closer to entry level. It doesn't cost much money, and the features are fairly basic. But on a daily basis, a motorcycle like this can survive that kind of a bashing. And like, it's not exciting or thrilling to ride, which is why if you can afford more, you look at the more lifestyle oriented choices. But it's just something to keep in mind when you're riding a bike like this. Like, its capability is far greater than anything that you would immediately associate with it.
Coming to the end of this video, I guess the question really is whether this experiment of mine to turn back the clock in some way was successful. And I think it was because of the motorcycle that I was riding. If I had ridden the bike that I actually started riding on, the old TVS Victor, it would have probably felt really outdated and really like rickety, obviously. But in this version and this form of it, it still does the basics really well. Good mileage, very easy to ride, anybody can ride it, comfortable seat. So all of the basics are done really well, and you have this trickle down of tech that makes this feel a lot more modern and a lot more updated. So I actually enjoyed riding it, and it definitely sort of made me reconnect to that original joy of motorcycling, where you're no longer sort of obsessed about what bike you're riding and, you know, how cool it is and how many different ways and what it's made for. The thrill of that is separate. That is a separate kind of motorcycling that like we all enjoy. But this was back to the basics, and I absolutely enjoyed it. It was a privilege to be able to do this, and I do hope that someday in the future, this is something that I've always wanted to do, is to ride a motorcycle like this, maybe in a place like Southeast Asia somewhere, get my hands on something like this and do a little bit of a trip through there. Hopefully someday that'll work out, but for now, I'm just really happy that I got to do this. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope it made you think back to the time when you started riding motorcycles, and hope to see you around and catch you in the next video.